Hello and welcome to Issues of the Moment. Today we're looking at a global crisis that is no longer hypothetical but unfolding in real time, with direct consequences for economies and everyday life. In recent weeks, the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical supply routes, was completely shut down during a 6-week conflict, disrupting the movement of oil, gas, and essential goods across the globe. Although a ceasefire led to a partial reopening, the situation remains far from stable. Passage is now restricted, tightly controlled, and in some cases conditioned on approvals and heavy financial charges running into millions of dollars per vessel. Even more concerning is the latest development. High-level talks between the United States and Iran in Islamabad, Pakistan, which lasted for hours, ended without any agreement. That failure has raised fresh concerns about escalation, with both sides holding firm on key issues and signaling possible next steps that could further complicate access to the strait. What this means is simple. The crisis is not over. If anything, the uncertainty is deepening. So the question today is no longer just about disruption, but about the future. If this route cannot be relied upon, what alternatives exist? How practical are they? And what will it cost economies and ordinary people to adjust? Just in a moment, you will meet my guest who will throw more light on these issues of discourse. My name is Justin Bemunye and I welcome you to the program. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this short break. Once again, I thank you so much for joining us on Issues of the Moment. And today our focus is on Beyond Hormuz, rethinking global supply routes. And what we are witnessing is no longer just a disruption. It is a growing global uncertainty with diplomacy failing to deliver immediate solutions and tensions still very much alive. You know, joining us today to break this down is a maritime expert. He is Dr. Capt. Danladi. Well, thank you so much once again for coming to NTA International on this program to discuss these very important issues as it unravels. You're very much welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, once again, Beyond Hormuz, rethinking global supply routes. That's our focus. Let's start from where things stand now. We've seen a shutdown. Could be a partial shutdown, depends on what we call it, but a partial reopening under strict conditions of the Strait of Hormuz, and now a failure of diplomatic talks between the United States and, of course, Iran. How does this combination, being an expert, a maritime expert, how does this combination of uncertainty and control affect global confidence in this Strait of Hormuz?
Okay, thank you very much for this important question. So it's very important for us to understand the role of the Strait of Hormuz when it comes to the international shipping. So the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most critical maritime choke points in the world. I would say it's artery or lifeline of international shipping, because 1/3 of the global seaborne oil trade passes through the Strait of Hormuz. That is how critical the Strait of Hormuz is. And every day, more than 20 million barrels of crude oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz before they temporarily shut down. So that's very important. And a significant volume of liquefied natural gas and fertilizers also passes through the Strait of Hormuz. That's how crucial the Strait of Hormuz is. And out of this volume of cargo, more than 80% of the total volume of cargo that passes through the Strait of Hormuz is bound for Asia. So it's very important when it comes to supply chain. So Strait of Hormuz is bounded between Iran and also Oman. To the north is Oman, to the south is Iran, which is very important. So we have seen the military escalation in the Strait of Hormuz that causes a temporary disruption to the international shipping. And what does that mean? It simply means that the vessel that remains in the Persian Gulf are there, and also those ones that remain in the Arabian Sea cannot even come in and out. And it simply means that there's going to be issues when it comes to the global supply of crude oil, which has resulted in the increase in the global crude oil prices. We have seen a surge in the crude oil prices. We have also seen a surge in the daily charter rate of ships because the supply rate has been limited. Now, another issue that we have to look into, we also have to look into the safety of the ships. The insurance premium has gone up, and some insurance companies have also canceled the premiums. So those are some of the challenges. And what does it affect a common man? When, the global oil price increases, the petrol price, even in Nigeria, also increases, and then it affects the common man because the transportation cost increases, the cost of food also increases. That's very important for us to know. That's how crucial, how critical the Strait of Hormuz is. Now, talking about your question about the partial lockdown of the Strait of Hormuz and partial closure. Well, it's very important for us to know that in the past, vessels passes to and fro of Strait of Hormuz without any issue. So that's what we call a guaranteed passage. Even under the UNCLOS, United Nations Convention of the Laws of the Seas, it gives guaranteed passage, right of innocent passage. There was no problem at all. But now with the military escalations, there has been issues that before you pass through the Strait of Hormuz, you must obtain military clearance. There are a lot of political and diplomatic issues ongoing. So it turns back to look at the importance of shipping. Now, with these issues that are happening, it simply means that those countries or those states that are within the critical maritime choke point, it simply means that they can be able to take any decision when there is a political tension. And what does that mean? It means that it's going to have a huge impact on the global supply chain. And it's also passing a message to other countries that have the critical choke points that, okay, when there is tension or when there is a geopolitical escalation, they can be able to take charge of those particular choke points and determine which vessel passes through, what condition they can be able to impose. That's one of the issues. Another issue has to do with vulnerability of shipping. There are a lot of companies that depend on what we call just-in-time arrival of goods and services to sustain their production. And with this partial shutdown, it simply means that they will lack a lot of raw materials, which is a serious issue. It means that there is no confidence in the global supply chain, which is very important. We have also talked about the issue of escalation in crude oil prices, which is another huge challenge that we are passing through today.
Now, we're not going to dwell so much on the diplomatic talks or issues surrounding diplomacy here. Let's see. We're talking more on the disruption of the supply chain, as you rightly pointed out. And we see here clearly that there are strong signals from both sides. Possible enforcement actions on one hand, and of course, continued control of this strait on the other hand. Now, what does this actually mean, for the stability of global shipping, maybe in the coming weeks or the coming months ahead?
Okay, so the shipping companies and the international shipping, when a disruption occurs, they are prone to changes. And then the shipping companies adapt quickly when it comes to resilience, of the maritime trade. So in the past, when we have this military escalation, what has happened now? The crude oil price surges high, which has impacted the cost of bunker fuel. Bunkers is what the vessel consumes to move from point A to point B. And we have seen the surge in the freight rate of vessels. The operating costs of vessels have gone up. So what does that mean? It means that most of this cost is not only going to be borne by the shipping companies, but it's going to be passed to the final users and the global supply chain and consumers. So this is one of the implications. Another implication is now some vessels that are bound for the Persian Gulf, they might be able to reroute their vessel around the Cape of Good Hope. When they are rerouting their vessels, what happened in that case? It simply means that the average voyage time of the vessel have increased. What does that mean? If the average voyage time of the vessel increase, the fuel consumption of that vessel will increase. It means that the ship owner is going to spend more when it comes to fuel of the vessel. It's going to spend more when it comes to operating costs of the vessel, and it's going to add to the number of days. And most of these costs are also going to be borne by the final consumer or final users of those goods and services. In your earlier question, I mentioned about the just in time. Now, the global supply chain might likely move from just in time to just in case, whereas they have to stock more of this product in case of any volatility when it comes to shipping. Now, we talk about adjustment when it comes to the global supply chain. A lot of manufacturing companies that depend on just-in-time goods and services have to adjust the way they operate now by stocking more of these goods and services in case of any disruption. The COVID has come and gone. We have seen the disruption the COVID caused. And now we have the political instability in the Middle East, which have led to the partial closure and full closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, let's also look at other aspects when it comes to supply chain. Now, there are also ports in the Red Sea that you might say, oh, they are alternative ports for you to be able to act as transshipment ports, so that goods that are bound to Persian Gulf can be offloaded in those particular ports, and then you can use truck or rail to transport them to the Persian Gulf. But what happens in those ports? Those ports now will face congestion. There's going to be a lot of congestion. There's going to be delayed, and the average waiting times of vessel will increase, which will incur additional cost in goods and services. So, but it's very important and it's very critical for us to understand that when such disruption occurs, the shipping industry is not going to halt. No, the shipping activity is going to move on. The ship owners have to devise a means exactly to see how they can be able to adjust to this disruption. And one of the means is, one, to adjust the sailing schedule of the vessels. The second one is you can be able to change the bookings. Some of the bookings for containers and the liners might be changed or might be rescheduled. When it comes to freight rates, you have to adjust because the bunker cost has increased, which will lead to higher freight rates. So you have to adjust. When it comes to also insurance costs, you also have to adjust. So it's very important. The shipping company is such an industry that if there's any disruption, you must be able to have all the necessary mechanism in place to adjust.
Okay. Now that brings us to the big question. Now you've mentioned some other things in this light, but the big question now is, or the bigger question rather, if the world, peradventure, now begins to accept that Hormuz may not or may no longer be fully reliable. You've mentioned some options, but what are the most realistic, alternatives that can be deployed almost immediately?
Okay, now you are talking about the immediate strategies. So, if you look at, I mentioned earlier that a quarter of global seaborne trade when it comes to oil, crude oil movement, passes through the Strait of Hormuz. So when we are looking at the immediate strategy and solutions, first of all, we have to utilize the existing pipelines. There are existing pipelines that bypasses the Strait of Hormuz. Okay. One, there's the East-West Saudi Arabian pipeline, which is called the Petrol Line. Okay. So it links the East Province to Yanbu port, which is in the Red Sea, and is fully operational now. Is capable of, at least they are capable of pumping about 7 million barrels per day via that particular pipeline. Then there's another pipeline, the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline, that links UAE to Fujairah, also to bypass those. But when you look at the fraction, how many volumes of crude oil is being transported before the partial closure of the Strait of Hormuz? We are talking about capacity, 20 million. Pipes, pipelines also have their limitation. We are now talking about 7 million barrels through the Saudi Arabia East-West pipeline, that's a petrol line, and also about 1.5 to 2 million barrels, possibly through the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipelines. So when you compare to a VLCCs, big crude oil tankers that transit through the Strait of Hormuz, that carried about 20 million barrels a day, we are talking about 8 million barrels or 9 million barrels. So you now see that we have a shortfall. But they are temporary measures, they are partial measures that should be able to help. Some people are asking about trucking. That is very, very, very difficult. You know, when you look, 1 barrel of crude oil is about 159 liters, 158.976. And then a truck carries about 33,000 liters. You need about 9,800 trucks to move a VLCC that carry about 2 million barrels. So that is not feasible. So in the temporarily, you say in the short time, let's say the partial one have to do utilizing existing pipelines. So you ship the crude oil from the East provinces to Yangon via the Red Sea and you export it, or you ship it through the Abu Dhabi pipe. Then there are other alternatives. Now you have to also look at crude oil reserves that have been stocked by different nations. They should be able to release most of those crude oil reserves so that you might have a temporary supply in the market, which is another very important aspect. Now, let's also look at another crucial aspect. Those people that are buying their crude oil supplies from the Middle East, they should start, those companies, oil majors, they should start sourcing for alternative sellers, alternative producers in Africa, in America, and in Europe. That will also help, rather than over-relying in a particular geopolitical zone. However, there are issues when it comes to that. There are contractual obligations. When it also comes to the quality of crude oil, some refineries have specification of crude oil they will need to refine. You know, so when it also comes to the volume, do those other places have the capacity and the volume to supply those particular crude oil? You have to look into that. Just before I forget, when it talks pipelines as well, we talk about pipelines as partial measures, but there are challenges when it comes to pipeline. One of the biggest challenges when it comes to pipeline has to do with vandalism. So vandalism is a serious issue, is a serious threat when it comes to pipelines. And most of these pipelines link the producer to the end point. So when there are changes in the international market, when disruption occurs, unlike in ships, in bigger vessels, where we mentioned about rerouting of vessels, can you reroute pipes easily? It's not possible for you to reroute pipes easily. Let's also look at the products, because in the Persian Gulf today, it's not only crude oil that's being shipped. You also have other refined products. Can you also be able to use that single pipeline to move most of those refined products? There are limitations as well. Let's also look at the cost. If you are also considering building new pipelines, the cost of building new pipelines, the cost implication is there, which is very important. You also have to look at the time it takes, because you need planning, you need to mobilize materials, which is very important. So all these measures, they are temporal measures we are talking about. They are partial measures. But in the long run, we have to look at diversification, which is very important and crucial. We have to look at opening alternative routes, which is very important and crucial. And we also have to look at developing more bypass pipelines so that when some disruption occurs, you can be able to move these products from the Persian Gulf also to the final users.
Now let's put all these alternatives you've talked about together. Now, bringing them together, considering all these alternatives together, we realize that they come with trade-offs, cost, cost, time, infrastructure, and risk. Are we now entering a phase where global trade becomes more expensive by default?
So, to answer your question is yes and no. It all depends. We are talking about a particular maritime choke point now, not a global maritime choke point. So it's a single maritime choke point which has a huge impact on the entire world. So we will say yes. If you look at in the last 3-4 weeks, there has been surge in the crude oil prices. Why do we have that surge? It's as a result of the partial closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So when you have surge in crude oil prices, what are the consequences? You know, now the freight rate of the vessel increases. You know, the cost of bunker increases. The cost of living also increases. The cost of transportation increases. So in that particular, when I say yes, it means yes, it's going to drive, you know, shipping costs up, and it's also going to pose significant challenges when it comes to supply chain, because like I mentioned earlier, some companies depends on just-in-time raw materials. And when we talk about the Strait of Hormuz, not about crude oil alone. You know, there are also liner vessels going in and out. You know, there are liquefied natural gas, fertilizers, and fertilizer is agricultural industry today depends heavily on fertilizer. So what is that going to mean? It's going to mean that the agricultural products will likely go up. That means the cost of foods will also rise. So it's very important. Now, there are other maritime choke points. You talk about the Malacca Strait today, the Singapore Strait, the Panama Canal. The traffic is flowing well. But with this tension, like I mentioned, one of their strategies is a lot of ship owners are rerouting their vessels. So you might have a bit of more dense traffic in other routes because the ships are not meant to be idle, they are meant to move. So they are rerouting their ships, they are rebooking cargoes, they are changing destinations, while it causes also congestion in some port. So to your question, it's a yes and also a partial no. That's why I was able to give that clarity.
Now, from the maritime standpoint, would you say the global shipping industry is adapting fast enough, you know, to this evolving crisis, or are we still reaching or reacting to events as they unfold?
Okay, for the global shipping industry, I look at it with what has just happened. I think we have in the face of reactive adaptation. So you are reacting to the challenges that are just unfolding at the moment. For instance, now one of the reactive strategies is to reroute vessels. You know, is to change the sailing times. While the vessels that are in the Persian Gulf, they discharge their cargo and wait until when it is safe for them to leave. So you look at it, there is a bit of reactive strategy as well. So like I mentioned earlier, that the shipping industry is such an industry that when there is a disruption, there are resilient strategy for them to return back to business. It's not like the business is not going to hold. The shipping business is not going to hold. It's going to continue. But the ship owners have strategies, rerouting of the vessels to different ports, they cancel booking to other ports, which is very important. You are going to diversify your fleet to other routes. You are going to look for alternative routes. You are going to source for intelligence sharing so that you should be able to know when it's safe for your vessel to transit through those ports, which is very, very important. In some cases, when disruption occurs, you reduce the transit speed of the vessel so that it takes time for them to arrive. They burn lesser fuel, and then bunker is one of the major costs, and it reduces the operational costs. When you also look at the insurance today, it's very important and crucial. The insurance costs have gone up because the war risk zone. So the ship owners have to quickly adapt to it. Some insurance companies have also canceled the war risk insurance. So the ship owners have to quickly adapt by sourcing for other insurance companies that they will be able to insure their vessel when it comes to war insurance premium. Now we are talking about freight rates. The bunker prices have gone up. The ship owner have to adapt, you know, by buying those bunkers at that particular price. So the adaptability is a key. There are strategies in place to be able to adapt to most of this volatility.
Now let's bring all these things home. You know, for a country like Nigeria, where such you know, global disruptions, as you are aware, quickly translate into higher fuel prices, increased cost of living. What does this situation, mean in practical terms for citizens?
Okay, this situation, when you look at it critically, when there is a disruption, the oil price surge, we are one of the major oil exporting countries. So what it means that we'll have more revenue, because if you are selling crude oil before at $60 per barrel and now it's $100 per barrel, 110, you are having more revenue to your country, which is important for us. We don't pray for war to happen, in my opinion, but you take advantage of some situations. For instance, the oil price have surged, so we get more revenue. Now, we talk about the negative implications. Now, the increase in oil price means we have the Dangote refinery today, which is a huge blessing to this country. If it is in the past, you have a lot of fuel queues, but throughout this period of disruption, we never had any fuel queues. Whatever we had is the increase in premium petroleum spirit price, the petrol price, and it's just as a result of the shock and the surge in the crude oil prices. So when the crude oil prices increase, the cost of transportation also increases, which also affect a common man that move from one destination to the other because he needs to pay for his transportation. Today, if you are taking Uber or Bolt, let's say from the airport to Garki, you have to pay additional transport compared to the fare you are paying before this disruption occur. So it has a negative implication. We also have to look at the supply chain for companies like the small scale and medium company that they are struggling to survive. So it also have a negative impact on them. And most at times when you have this rise in fuel costs, it also leads to increase in food prices. Yeah, so it's very important for us to know these challenges. We just pray that this war will be a thing of the past, so that we'll all return back. COVID has come and gone, and we are resilient on it, and we strongly believe that this war will also come and go.
A big amen to that. And well, thank you so much, Dr. Caleb Danladi, for your time with us. Thank you so much for your insight on this issue and for actually finding out time to come on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're very much welcome. That has been Issues of the Moment. Today we have examined a global crisis that is still evolving, where disruption, diplomacy, and uncertainty are all shaping the future of how the world moves energy and goods. With talks failing and tensions still high, the challenge is no longer just about keeping routes open, but about building systems that can withstand disruption and adapt a changing global reality. Because in the end, these are not distant events. They directly affect the cost of living, the stability of economies, and the everyday lives of millions of people around the world. My name is Justin Bemunyi. This is where the program ends. I thank you so much for being a part of it. And we say bye for now.